So let me introduce Jay Cassidy to you. He has edited over 30 films. His most recent credit, of course, is Silver Linings Playbook, where he was nominated for an Academy Award. And it was also nominated for 8 Academy Awards. He has collaborated with Sean Penn on all of his films, most notably Into the Wild, for which Cassidy was also nominated for an Academy Award. And his other credits include An Inconvenient Truth, and which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. And in 2007, Brothers, and he's also done Conviction and Waiting for Superman. And he's had one heck of a career. Please welcome Jay Cassidy.
Thank you.
Directly to my right here, despite the length of his hair, he says he is not a sound editor.
It's not blonde, though.
He doesn't want me to read this, but come on, Crispin, this is really cool. Crispin was born in San Francisco, and he grew up in Scotland. He graduated from the University of Edinburgh with honors in physics.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Really,
Put it
physics.
to good use, huh?
Which means he's a lot smarter than all of us in this room. And he has worked on such films as Rock and Rolla, Eagle Eye, and I Am Number 4. He's also currently working right now. In fact, both of these guys are currently working right now, which makes it really, really special to me. And also it should make it special to you that they took the time. They went right from work, right to here to talk to you. So please welcome Jay Cassidy, Crispin Struthers.
And all that working is a wonderful excuse to be spectacularly unprepared.
I don't even know what we're playing.
Yeah, but what I think the way to get, first of all, we did work together on Silver Linings Playbook. We are about to work together. I am currently working on, and Crispin is going to join me in a few weeks, on David O. Russell's next film, which is called Untitled at the moment. And so it's David O. Russell Untitled Project, or UDORP. So anyway, so and it is a meeting of the casts from The Fighter, in that it's Christian Bale and Amy Adams, and Silver Linings Playbook in that it's Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, and Paulie Herman.
Paulie Herman, I saw.
Paulie Herman, sure.
With the additions of Jeremy Renner and Louis C.K.
Oh, yes. So, David's assembled a wonderful cast. David's assembled a wonderful cast and madness. What can I say? But, we're here, I think we're talking about collaborating, and, I'll tell you our stories. I came to Silver Linings Playbook because Pam Martin, who had cut The Fighter, was not available, and it sent David on a search for another editor, and that's not a happy place for him because it means having to meet people and socialize and be polite and so it also means trusting somebody without really knowing that you can trust them. So, because you're giving your baby over to an editor first, the first chunk of time when he's still shooting, we're working with the film. Crispin, why don't you tell your story? We'll collaborate on this.
All right.
But anyway,
this is a talk or a question and answer?
This is our setup to our first clip.
Later is the Q&A.
Yeah, I worked on The Fighter as an assistant to Pam Martin, and okay, thank you. And David runs a very collaborative environment. He had lots of opportunity to cut, so obviously I wanted to repeat the experience, and was fortunate enough that David brought me back on Silver Linings as an editor. Jay had started before me, and then I came on board a little while after Jay started.
Yeah, and as far as collaboration, is you try not to work on the same scene at the same time. And there was a good, when Crispin arrived, there was a good chunk that had untouched that he could just work on. and I knew it would suck him in for several weeks, and it did. And it was a good way for him to get sort of into the movie. And, so the way you collaborate is that you do break it up into chunks. I had done in the sort of the first assembly, more than Crispin, because I've been on it longer. But then when David comes in, it becomes a question of what he's interested in working on at what particular moment. And so,
and he wants to start at the beginning. He
Yeah,
doesn't want to watch an assembly. He's just
he doesn't watch
I'll kill myself if I watch that. Let's just start at the
and
beginning.
I don't believe. I mean, it's the assembly of Silver Linings Playbook was about 5 hours. So,
I don't think anyone ever saw it.
Not in one sitting, and certainly not without a bathroom break. So, so the collaboration is sort of. You've got major chunks that each of us worked on, because once you invest in a certain chunk of material, you know that material, and it's much more efficient to have the editor that started with it stay with it, because he knows where all the bodies are buried, the variations. But then there's it's never that simple. I've only done it once where you cut the film in half, and this one went in that room, and this one went in that room. But there was overlap, and there were several scenes that got worked on several times by both of us at different times, where a new idea would be tried out. You want to do it? You did the last one, and they tended to be smaller, less substantive scenes, but and if you remember Silver Linings Playbook, I can't remember how it all broke out, but you certainly took over the bad night with Bob, the fight, and the ensuing breakdown with Led Zeppelin. That sort of fell into Crispin's province.
None of it happened much. We never really talked about it. Just like when David showed up, you kind of took this part, and then I did this part. And we kind of checkerboarded, jumping over each other, and you disappeared with the ending over Christmas to go, because we hadn't
gotten to the end, and so I did the end over Christmas and pretty much stayed with the end, sort of the last act of the movie. It's never a perfect world, and it isn't like he's going to do anything and I'm not going to see it, or I'm going to do something and he's not going to see it. So because you're right in the same little suite. So it's enormously beneficial to have several people working on a film. I like collaborations. I've got you can bring the best out of the material if you do it right and you stay in the proper spirit of the film. I think that was the case on Silver Linings. There was never a question about what movie we were making. There was always a question of how to make the movie that was to be made. And when we got off the track, it sort of came back. I also believe that if movies get a life, and you're working on this movie, and this life that sort of is there kind of tells you what to do and slaps you in the face and doesn't allow you to do things, and your bright, conceited idea doesn't work. And the more refined the editing gets, the stronger the life in the movie becomes. And so the collaboration, the key to it is that we sort of agree to do it, and we agree to split things up, and we also can't be precious about the fact that Crispin may recut something that I did, not because it's good or bad, just because it needs to be made different for the context that it now occupies. And the same thing for me, that I'll recut something that he's done. In the perfect world, it's best to have the chunks owned by
And
a particular editor.
Fairly consistent with that.
Yeah,
With the major
yeah.
chunks, they pretty much.
Yeah, the major chunks.
And you'd have to kind
yeah.
of like slap David about his hand, like, no,
Yeah,
that's Dave's,
yeah,
Jay's section,
and
I'm not touching that.
No, that was true. You had to kind of, David, bless his heart, he would run it quite inefficiently because his impulse control is such as it is. And so, part of my job was to sort of help him navigate the kind of the work so that that we weren't, having to rediscover the wheel that the other person knew, the other editor knew. I mean, that was important, that because you do, as you work with something, you do, as I said, you get a kind of accumulated knowledge about the material, and which isn't to say other people can't come along and make very hefty contributions to it. But so if the spirit is right, we all move forward together, and that's what we're going to do on the next film. And because it's an awful lot shorter schedule, we're probably going to have a third person working with us. But I thought maybe.
That was a secret.
Oh, it's not a secret. It's just the who. I thought the way to start out, because I haven't watched the film since February, we're going to run a little clip and then see what we can talk about. So let's run the first clip. So I know why I wanted to pick that one, but was because there are two things that are great about David's way of making films, and one is he uses the source music as score so well. I mean, I'm always knocked out by his musical. I mean, the Dave Brubeck. I mean, who would think of that for this movie?
And he had that planned well ahead of time.
Yeah, no, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
It's in the script, early stage of the script.
Right, right. And the musicians in here who really know that Dave Brubeck will know that the first 8 bars were repeated and the piano comes in late. So, but anyway, the
Bill
tricks.
Tallman, our music editor.
Yeah. But the other thing that's interesting about that and is that the meat of the diner scene, David shot 2 cameras shooting toward this actor, Jennifer Say, in 2 angles, and then walked around and shot it the other way. And it's a very long scene, and I think it's about 6 or 7 minutes in its entirety. And it does, and it began and it was yet longer. There was the questions about sex. There were more variations of, Bradley asking her about what else did people do, and but it is if you get the rhythm right and you get the sort of unconscious nature of it, it doesn't feel long at all. And in fact, it's a real case in film editing where the more you slow it down, the faster it goes. And there was a first long assembly that we did that had all of the dialogue, and then some little chunkettes of dialogue went, and a couple came back, and we tried some variation. The performances, except for a line or two, were basically from the first cut, but because the scene was so long, there really weren't a lot of takes of it. Because, you got this night, you're shooting in this diner and it's cold and you got all those people there, and you do a 7-minute scene in this direction. So how many times are you going to do that? And you're watching lunch, and then you turn around and you have to do the 7-minute scene. So, David tends to In a scene like this one stayed fairly close to the page, but often the case is he will stop it. You know, he tends to work with, he has the little viewer thing, so he can see what the camera's seeing, but he stays on the set. He's not in Video Village. And he tends to listen to the actors on the set, and he tends to interject things, and sometimes he'll rewrite right on the set and reword and really play around a lot with the scene. This scene in particular, he didn't really do that because the writing was really tight, and the actors, because it was so long, they had memorized it and they had rehearsed it, and it would have been really hard to change much of it and still get the kind of whole arc of their performance for the length of time. But it is, you know, for me as an editor, I was very happy with that diner scene, just because, just for what I said, the longer we made it, the faster it went. And so, go figure.
I always remember this scene, the first time, well, we did our director's cut with David, and then Bradley Cooper kind of showed up in the cutting room and never left. And then the producers showed up, and the first time we showed this scene to, the long version, to Bruce Cohen, he was like, he fell out of the couch onto the floor, and he watched it like on his knees, crying with joy at how good he, like, because he hadn't seen anything cut together before.
Oh, that's
so I always
true.
think of that when I see that scene.
Yeah, and you know, and maybe it was a minute and a half longer at that point. You know, the part of the job of editing is it's a reductive process, because, you know, I look at this and I remember the very first assembly of that scene where the Dave Brubeck music is, was, I mean, they walked down the street,
like
and
the whole Halloween
there
walk,
was like
yeah.
Kids and this and that, and people come with trick or treat, and I mean, they walked by this cemetery of graves that was set up for Halloween. There was, you know, and David tends to work in that way of really putting a lot of elements into a scene, and he knows full well that they all won't survive. And sometimes, and it's quite surprising when most of them do. I mean, the diner is, there's really no beat in there that's not in the script. There's just some verbiage removed. But, you know, David is smart enough to know that part of the key on the set is to know that you don't know what you're doing when you're shooting it. You can't know the context of how all this material's gonna play, and so he tends to sort of bracket performances. He'll do one at one pitch and then do with another interpretation, and that was very much the case in the first act of Silver Linings Playbook, because Bradley was out of the hospital and he was off his meds. So how manic does he get? You know, and so there were really manic versions of scenes, and almost sort of like patient as autism victim, you know, sort of like almost like the zombie takes. And so, and it was early in the shoot when they shot the things for part one, so there was tremendous range. And I didn't know David O. Russell at all, and also because of the situation with Pam, I got hired late, and they're all in Philadelphia, and nobody's talking to me, and I just look at this, and I don't know that there's a range. I don't know that they've planned this or that, and so, oh my God, I mean, and you know, these scenes do not go quickly. There's a concept that I've heard in the editorial world where is the editor up to camera, which is he cutting right behind? And I've never been anywhere close to being up to the camera. Maybe somebody is, but I mean, I'm so far behind all the time, you know, I'm now proud of it. So, and I think that's the only way your first pass on a scene is where you have to invest in and really kind of memorize all the material, and you have to consider, well, David shot this idea, I think it stinks, but it gets its day in court. And I'm not going to subvert it. I'm going to give it the best shot, and then, well, maybe I'll do a variation and keep it in the side bin here because I think it's better. So that's the time. On the first cut is when, because the pitch of things goes that such that sometimes it's real hard to go back, and you can overlook stuff. The most egregious example of that, and you had left the film and we were waiting for Danny Elfman to finish his score, and we went back through and we discovered, it's been there all along, but we were too stupid to go back to the material and look at it hard enough, of when Mom comes over and kisses Bradley Cooper on the head in the kitchen scene when Bob is asking Bradley to go to the game with his brother. We had that scene, we previewed it 7 times without Mom coming over and kissing the top of his head, and we found it. And I mean, this is in like the last couple weeks, and essentially the picture was locked, and and you're waiting for the composer and you're waiting to mix, and how could we not have that in the movie? It's just shocking. So anyway, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like, and we could do this 2 ways, because and the other clip is probably more Crispin heavy. So we could run that. Maybe we'll do that. Jennifer was 22 when she did this part. I mean, and she's up with De Niro and Bradley. I mean, and she's like owns the room.
Yeah, she takes them down in the next part.
She is something. She is, the angels come along and kiss a very few, and I think they kissed her. So you did most of that.
Yeah, so the tailgating scene is an example of another thing David does is improvising. I think the first cut of that scene felt like it was like 30 or 40 minutes long. I mean, the amount of stuff used to be in there. He shows up at the game. There's beer pong. There's this whole Indian game called Kabaddi, and we explain the whole rules, and he plays that. Somebody teaches in the story of Ganesh. He has a whole Silver Linings game with Ronnie where they paint his face. I mean, it went on forever. And they shot it all in a day, and then we just kind of gradually whittled it down into what you see here. And then music, again, playing a very strong part in this. The White Stripes song, when we put it in, we knew we had to have that song. Jack White only gives you 1 song per movie, and we already had.
Yeah, in the dance, one of the 3 songs in the sort of climactic dance that they shot.
I think he had Fell in Love with the Girl.
Fell in Love, yeah.
But then we had Hell of Operator, and was like, well, we need that too. And David, being David, he gets what he wants, so we got 2 Jack White songs. He does the same thing with Led Zeppelin, and he gets the songs no one else can get. And then back to the kind of high, medium, low performance issue when Bradley comes back in the room and there's Bob De Niro there, and then that's like super intense old Robert De Niro, and we kind of argued amongst ourselves whether we could go there before we decided we had to. We can't leave that performance on the floor.
It's amazing how timid you are when you begin, and then when you look back, a year later, you think, that's obvious. Of course, it should be that way.
But we were afraid of it for a while. I don't know if we can go that hot.
This movie benefited by the previewing process tremendously, more than any other film I've been involved with. And it only had to do with the filmmakers, producers, director, us, our confidence in what we were doing. And I think that's, we fortunately got numbers that sort of Harvey Weinstein was very happy with and the marketing people were happy with. But what it allowed us to take the movie farther. And every one of those not everyone, because some of them, depends how you kind of, there were 7 instances of screenings, but sometimes we were screening 2 versions in different theaters to get like.
One of those when we discovered the shorter, tighter version
Yeah.
was not necessarily better.
That was a real education too. You know, you say, your movie's 2 hours and 2 minutes. That's Harvey. And make it shorter. That's kind of like the knee-jerk thing. Shorter's better. And there's certain cases it's not. You know, that the movie found a length, and if you took the things out that you thought you needed to take out to make it shorter, you heard it, and it was less. It was just less, and and he's smart enough to, when he sees that, he knows time to back off, and he's also he's been, for me in my career, I tell only good Harvey stories because I've had, since the mid 90s, I've worked with him with a huge gap in between when he kind of reinvented himself. But I came back to this and was so delighted because it is real old Hollywood showmanship in a variation that amongst the kind of corporate survival of the fittest, Harvey's a one-off.
Jay and Crispin, we want to get some questions
All right.
in, so
I'm going to shut up.
I'm going to give you the microphone, and we're just going to pass it around. Go ahead, Les.
Thanks. You say you start out with a 5-hour version and a rough cut, which, obviously so many movies do start long. But I'm wondering, knowing that it certainly can't run that long, and you probably didn't have a 700-page script. At what point do you sort of pre-edit and you don't put everything in, or are you sort of obligated to give the director everything and then you collaboratively start whittling it down, meaning that you have to do it that way versus you independently go preview?
You don't want to prejudge material. You just have to keep an open mind, and even though if you think, oh well, this is never going to make it, you'd be surprised what makes it. You'd really, and some of those initial kind of smart guy judgments you make, I understand movies, this is junk, da da da. You're wrong. You're just wrong, and you just have to be open to the fact that somebody else had a big investment and shot it, and it may be a dead end, but it's our dead end.
So all the improv stuff like this, we cut the comedy scene.
Yeah.
We know this is something thing is coming out, but it deserves its day in court.
Yep.
I'll let you guys pick the people, and I'll pass the microphones. Go ahead.
We don't pick people.
You can raise the house lights a bit because we're not going to. Okay. I don't want to concentrate entirely over
We'll
here.
go left side, right side. How about that?
I want to make sure everybody's got. So I'll give you,
front
and then
and
I'll get
back.
over there.
Thank you. Similar question to the previous one. When you approach a first pass or rough cut on a dialogue scene, like the first one we saw, do you cut in each reverse shot of each person talking and delivering their line fully, and then go back in to do cutaways?
No, I mean you edit the scene. There's
the way you feel it.
There's sections of that are the first cut.
Okay.
And I've had in a couple of movies scenes that just were written well, performed well, and they never changed from the first cut. So you make it look like a movie.
Okay. Next question. Speaking of that, because I'm going to follow up on that, when you actually give over your first cuts, are you absolutely? Do you want to make? It needs to play for you, right? Before you hand it over, or is it just an assembly?
I mean, it's a cut scene. It may be a long cut scene. I don't use the word assembly so much as it's the script cut.
Okay.
And so it's everything that was in the script, and with David, it's everything that was in the script plus the stuff he thought up on the set that day. So they tend to be long and have beginnings, middles, and ends that don't always stay, but it's what was shot. The best representation of what was shot, knowing that when you put it all together, you're going to be, the reductive process will occur, but it has to begin from something that's solid.
Question over here? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for talking to us. I just had a question. One of the things I found really interesting about the film was how the first section, when he's not on his medication, is so differently directed and edited than the later sections, where it's kind of a little more disjointed and scenes kind of bleed into each other. And I was wondering how much of that was directorial, how much was editorial, and how much you found in the edit room on that.
I think the material took us to that place. I don't think you consciously say, "Oh, well, we better make this frenetic."
Another thing we never talked about, just kind of did it and kept editing until it felt right.
One example is that scene that Crispin did at the night sort of breakdown with the father. That was cut, and there were many musical versions. I mean, it was sort of cut, and the pieces, we had all the pieces, and it was a little bit longer, probably.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing about that was finding the musical treatment.
And then David came up with the Led Zeppelin song "What Is and What Will Never Be" or whatever it's called, and then just said, "Here, go recut the picture to this song. Don't touch the song. Just recut the picture." And went back and recut it, and it made it a lot more manic and jump cutty. And he's pulling the videos out, and then it was like the song changes. Let's go upstairs now and try and match the intensity of the song, and it worked. I think.
Yes, no. So that was a real key to that. So it's interesting when you're done and somebody looks at it and says, "Wow, you're quite a stylist." It's mothers of invention. You're trying to survive the movie, and so you come up with solutions that after the fact are style.
Question in the middle section over here? Okay, right here.
Did David O. Russell give you circle takes, or did he give you the entire day's shoot to work with?
Oh, everything. Plus all the time in between when he keeps the camera running.
The camera will point up at the sky, and it'll walk around and come down for the other setup.
He wants the actors to never hear a cut. He prefers to if he can, reset the scene with the camera running and everybody paying attention.
Whether you're ready or not. 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah,
go.
1, 2, 3, go. It makes for sometimes a department might not be ready, or a focus, or this or that, but what it does to the actors is if it never lets them off the hook, and eventually they kind of get so they're not acting anymore.
So I have a question, which is that when you're editing a particular scene, obviously you're paying attention to dynamics like pacing and things like that, but obviously you want to understand it in its greater context. And I'm kind of curious, in a collaborative environment such as this, where you're not necessarily editing the whole film yourself, either one of you, how do you keep that big picture in mind about what the pacing of the overall film is and how the particular scene you're working on at that moment might fit in to the bigger picture, when maybe half of that bigger picture was cut by someone else?
Well, once we've been through the director's cut, which took a couple of months before any of us actually watched the cut movie together, we then screen the movie together, all of us together, and more people, and that we screen it pretty often, and that gives us a pretty good sense of what the movie wants to be as a whole.
Yeah. So you sort of do know the context, but it's learn by doing.
In your opinion, as an editor, what would you say is the difference? What's the difference between like a good director and a great director, from your perspective in the edit?
I'll just say there's no such thing as a good scene in a bad movie. It's not. It either all works or none of it works.
You said before that you called the movie like the director's baby. What is it like, or how do you balance being true to the director's vision but still putting your own touch to the piece?
Well, he's seeing it, so he sees what we do. So we don't sneak anything by him. So I just, if he doesn't say it, I figure he likes it. what I'm doing. So I keep doing it.
To me, the best cut is when she's jogging out of nowhere, like in Star Trek, and appears next to him, like twice. And I was wondering who thought of that, because to me, that cut is so epitomizes the spirit of the movie. It's like synergetic truth, you know. Who got that cut? Was that written, or did that just kind of...
Written, David O. Russell. He
That's
wrote
fantastic.
it. You know, and I never read the book that this film was based on purpose, because I only wanted to know what the film we had was, that story. You know, this is all interpretation, right? There's a book, a script writer interprets it, a director may, if it's a different person, interprets that. The editing is an interpretation of what happened on the set. So I want to like limit the input, and so it may be that Matthew Quick wrote those beats into the book, but I don't know.
I met him the night before the Oscars.
Yeah, no, I met him
He was
too, yeah.
happy. He was happy with the movie.
Oh, very
Yeah.
happy.
I didn't read the
Very
book either,
happy.
but he was happy.
Yeah.
So how different is the locked movie from the original script?
Things are missing that
Yeah,
he shot.
I mean, I think, you know, look, the thing about David as a writer is he hit the tone of the movie in the script, and it's there from the beginning. You understand that manic world, and you feel the humor and the like switches to the kind of horrible manicness and back. I mean, it's that spirit was there in the script, and here again, what as he shot it, a further interpretation of that script, and as we all edited it, another interpretation, but of the same thing. This is not a movie that was remade in the editing at all. You know, it didn't need that, because the idea was solid, and it was solid on the page.
How many assistant editors did you have working with you, and how do you collaborate with them?
We unfortunately, and I feel really bad because I let the situation go on too long. But this was one assistant. During the dailies, we had a second assistant. So it's a pretty lean operation that we run. And we had a music editor for much longer than on many films I've been on, because David is so, he's just going through hundreds of tracks, and it's great to have a music editor there, because it would take away from the picture cutting that we have to be doing. I mean, we have music in, and we are sometimes putting it in directly into the cut, but there's a whole process that David's constantly working as he's cutting the picture with finding the music he wants to use in the film.
Mike Azevedo was our assistant
yeah.
editor, and he took everything we could throw at him, got a lot of overtime, and he did a lot of the visual effects too, and the paint outs and stuff. Is transitioned over to that too.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple of more questions before we get booted out of here. Okay.
We'll do yes, no answers to get all the questions.
You've cut both narrative and documentary. Can you speak to some of the challenges of working with a director in a documentary? Like what document you begin to cut from in the beginning?
What was the lesson?
So for Inconvenient Truth and Waiting for Superman, can you speak to some of the challenges of working with a documentary director in the early stages?
Well, you know, I think when you're making a film, the lights go down, the screen illuminates, and you're telling a story. And whether it's a documentary and uses those conventions, or it's a narrative film, that you have the same problem between the screen and the audience. And so, you know, the more I've done them, the less the differences are between the two forms, because you still have to, you know, you have to give people a reason to sit in their seat in a documentary as well as in a dramatic film. And if they're not, you know, if they're not compelled to stay there, they don't come and pay money to see it. And so, a documentary may have different parts of the film grammar. You may use different kind of levels of abstraction, because you may have people talking directly to an interviewer. You may have voiceover used differently. So, but I look at that as just different pieces of the grammar. And I did this movie Into the Wild. We did everything in that movie that you would have done in a documentary. Break the fourth wall. Emile Hirsch talks to the camera. I mean, we had voiceover. We had letter writing from Alaska on the screen. We had chapters interspersed into it. We had these random quotes that would just kind of come up and sort of represent a state of mind. And so, I mean, that's a film where you took a lot of those sort of documentary levels of abstraction and you used them in a dramatic film. And so, for me, as the doer, I almost don't make the distinction anymore.
One last question.
Crispin, how did you get onto The Fighter in the first place to meet David O. Russell?
Right place, right time. I was cutting an indie film by this Latvian director down the hall from Terrell, who got a job, who had been the assistant on Little Miss Sunshine with Pam, and then he called me up one day and was like, "Do you want to come and help out on the director's cut of The Fighter?" And I was like, "Yes," and that was that.
Those stories are real common, about right place at the right time,
Yeah, speaking of that, you went from assistant editor to this Silver Linings Playbook, which is your first job as an editor. When you showed your first cut of a scene to Jay Cassidy, who's got some serious cred, were you at all a little bit nervous about how he was going to react to
He
it?
certainly didn't act nervous.
This is a big movie.
No,
You're working with Jay Cassidy.
Jay was very collaborative and very trusting, and
No, and also I knew the material. I didn't know it as well as he did, but I knew what it was. And the first thing he did was the 40 minutes of the tailgating, and I knew that was going to be what it was, and it was. I mean, it was, never to be seen. And there are a few little on the DVD. There's a couple of little snippets from that. But there was not an expectation of a finished scene. My God, no. You're putting together all these little scenelets David shot into some kind of a big long form, and then it'll go to the next step.